Now we will discuss the issues of negative evidence. At the grammatical level, you have two types of evidences. One is considered as the positive evidence and the other is negative evidence. Now, positive evidence is the evidence that a particular utterance is grammatical, the language the child uses is grammatical, and the negative evidence is that a particular utterance is ungrammatical. So, positive evidence basically states that a particular utterance is grammatical and the negative evidence says that it is ungrammatical. Now we will look at the issues of negative evidence among children. Children receive negative evidence when someone indicates that a particular utterance is ungrammatical or inappropriate. Now Pinker argues that it would be very difficult to acquire a language from positive evidence alone. Now this notion is based in part on some computer simulation studies of language learning done many times ago. This work assumed that children use linguistic evidence to construct hypotheses about the language they are learning, much as a linguist would use such evidence to learn about language in a foreign land. Now, Gould found that when he wrote a program in which the computer received only positive evidence, it failed to acquire the language adequately. This was presumably because positive evidence is consistent with a great number of different grammars. Without knowing what is ungrammatical in a language, it is impossible to rule out some of the various competing grammars. Pinker has also claimed that, on the whole, parents do not provide sufficient negative evidence to enable a child to learn a language. He further argues that although negative evidence is sometimes present, it is not systematically and consistently available to all children acquiring language, and yet all normal children do acquire a language. His argument is as follows. A. Positive evidence alone is consistent with too many competing grammars. B. Negative evidence which could constrain the problem space is not generally available. C. Therefore, some constraints must be innate. Then we have Brown and Hullon. They examined parents' responses to various well and ill-informed child utterances. The researchers were particularly interested in parents' explicit statements of approval and disapproval of a child's utterance. The parents in this study did little to correct their syntactic errors, although they sometimes corrected their children on semantic error, that is, when the children's statements were not true. They conclude that there was not even a shred of evidence that approval and disapproval are contingent on syntactic correctness. The results have been replicated and extended by Hirsch-Pesek. And they also studied 40 mother-child in which the children were 2 to 5 years old. So they replicated Brown's study and their results with regard to the relative absence of explicit approval and disapproval of child utterances. However, they also examined implicit parental responses, such as when the mother repeated a child utterance with corrected syntax. They found that these responses were more likely after an ill-formed child utterance than a well-formed child utterance, at least for the 2-year-old. Thus, there are some subtle cues in parental responses to child speech that might assist children in acquiring language. Although negative evidence is present and may assist language development, but it is not necessary. The contrast between the poverty of stimulus and the robustness of the child's language remains the most sound justification of innate mechanisms.